If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Logger Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Logger Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Logger Line starts now.
Welcome aboard. Welcome back to another episode of The Logger Line, a new podcast brought to you by Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. As always, I'm your host, Ben Dubose, Houston Rockets beat writer, editor for USA Today's The Rockets Wire, contributor to Sports Talk 790. I've been affiliated with so many organizations over the years, including the great folks over at ClutchFans, and that's where my guest for today's show is from. His name is David Weiner, lawyer by day, Rockets capologist by night. You may know him best as Bema Thug, which is his handle on Twitter and on ClutchFans. David, good evening. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to get you on. And as the lead-in would suggest, the subject of this is going to be the Rockets and their salary cap situation. We're heading into August, so this is the slowest point on the NBA calendar. So it's a good time, in my opinion, to hit the reset button and look where the Rockets are after the draft, after the first wave of free agency. And we'll get to the 2023 figures in a little bit. I think everyone who follows the Rockets and their rebuild knows that the 2023 offseason is really the true pivot point between the draft picks they owe to Oklahoma City coming back into play and all the cap space they are lined up to have. There's a potential incentive, a big incentive, for the Rockets to start putting a winning team on the court as soon as a year from now. And they're currently positioned to have as much as 60 plus million, even 70 plus million by some figures of salary cap space a year from now. We'll get to that, but I want to lead off by discussing the remainder of the 2022 offseason, because as we head into August, there is an important date coming up for the Rockets and any potential transactions. It's August 24th, which is 2 months after the trade sending Christian Wood to Dallas went final. The Rockets brought back Marquise Chris, Sterling Brown, Trey Burke, and Boban Marjanovic in the deal. Of those four, only Boban is potentially sticking around according to reports, and the reports indicated that even Boban wasn't 100% locked to stick around, but the other three, Marquise Chris, Trey Burke, Sterling Brown, all were said to be not sticking around in Houston, but to this point, over a month since the trade, they still are. So, Brian Windhorst meme, what's going on in Houston? David, I'll let you explain the importance of the August 24th date and what that might let the Rockets do.
Sure. So August 24th, it might be August 23rd, depending on how the league counts the number of days. Okay. But that's basically the first chance for the Rockets to aggregate those former Mavericks players in trades, in subsequent trades. So today, if they wanted to combine Trey Burke and Sterling Brown to match salaries in a trade, they could not do that right now. But on late August, August 24th, they can do that. And the reason why you haven't seen the Rockets waiving anybody, in fact, with the Bruno Fernando signing, which we may touch on later, they're at the full 20-man limit on their roster for the offseason roster limit. The reason they haven't made cuts of those Mavericks players who probably are not in their future, like you said, Ben, is that they're holding on to those salaries just in case there's a trade that could be made. My assumption is that if they were to make a trade, because they're over the cap but well shy of the luxury tax, those contracts can be aggregated in a trade to take on a larger salary that doesn't push them to the tax, but maybe they get they can extract an asset if it's a second round pick or even just cash. Something like that. There would be economic or basketball reason to keep these guys on the roster so that come late August, they can make a trade and get a future asset.
Yeah, and what I think a lot of people don't realize with how their salary books are currently set up, they don't really have any trade filler other than David Nwaba, who's basically a $5 million expiring. But let's say that there's a mid-tier player. I've got a couple of suggestions that we'll get into in a little bit, but making about $10-12 million a year, which is MLE range and average NBA salary. Well, right now it's tough for them to get there because you have Nwaba at 5 million, and then you don't really have any other guys that you can throw in. I guess Garrison Matthews, but that's at 2 million. The bottom line is most of your tradable pieces are so low in value that it's really hard to make the math work on these deals, even to get to an average salary. So that's why when you can get some of these guys, Burke at 3.4 million, Boban at 3.5, who are we forgetting? Oh, Sterling Brown at 3. So
Marquise Chris is 2.2 basically.
Oh yeah. There's the one I'm forgetting. Sorry. But yeah, 3 of them are at 3 million or above. So these are a lot more than your Garrison Matthews or your KJ Martin tier. And of course, I think the Rockets would like to get some value ideally for KJ if they trade him as young as he is. And right now, really, you have David Nwaba and not much else to make the math work. And I'm sure some will say, what about Eric Gordon? Well, the Rockets clearly view Eric Gordon as a real asset. They're not going to use him as salary filler. He's someone that would have to be, an example of another team actually giving real value to Houston for it to be worth their while. So right now, the Rockets are pretty limited with salary. And the example that I'll go to that I was teasing to a couple of minutes ago, look at the Pistons, who suddenly after the draft have a pretty crowded front court. They've got 2 veteran bigs, and we heard the Rockets going into the offseason talking about, or at least leaked to Jonathan Fagan, they're interested in a backup center with some pedigree. To this point, it hasn't really happened. They did re-sign Bruno Fernando, but that's to a training camp deal. I think that's more of just see what happens in camp, not someone that they're saying, hey, this is our backup center. The Pistons have 2 guys, veterans, in Nerlens Noel and Rockets legend Kelly Olynyk, that right now, they're either expiring in the case of Noel, who has, I believe, a team option for next season, so he doesn't affect wouldn't affect the 2023 cap picture at all. Olynyk has a tiny guarantee of like $3 billion, so he would barely impact you, and that's if you couldn't trade him, which you probably could with a guarantee that small, some sort of sweetener. I'm sure you could offload him if push comes to shove with a guarantee that minimal. Yet, as it stands right now, the Rockets couldn't realistically get to that number. It's David Nwaba, and then, well, I guess they could, but not without dipping into players that they would like to keep. Whereas when that 24th date gets here, you could theoretically package Nwaba with Boban or with Sterling Brown and get to that $10 to $12 million a year range that Noel and Olynyk are in. And there are different styles of big men, of course. Noel more of a rim protector, Kelly more offensively inclined, so it depends on what you're looking for. But I think that's the kind of player where I'm not going to say for sure it's happening, but those are the options that I think you're keeping those Dallas players around for, right?
Yeah, I mean, Noel and Olynyk both are really intriguing options. The fact that Detroit is still, I think, about $10 million below the cap, I don't know if there's a great deal of incentive for them to shed one of those guys other than the owner saving a couple of bucks.
Well, but I'm assuming, by the way, that you would have to give them, and please don't faint on me, but you'd have to give them probably like a future second-round pick, something like that.
God,
kind of sweetener.
No, second-round pick guy would disapprove. No, I understand that. I mean, Noel and Olynyk are both good players, so that's understandable. I mean, I think another angle they could take, and one that I think is possibly more likely, although not as beneficial as your ideas, Ben, is target a team that is either very close to or above the luxury tax, that is looking to shed some dollars, because those teams every dollar they shed could save them $3, $4, $5. So look at a team, and I'm just throwing this example out there randomly, and I'm not 100% sure what this player's true current value is, but look at a team like Phoenix and Dario Saric, who is coming off a lost season from an ACL tear. Reports are that he should be ready by training camp, but the Suns probably don't know what they have there. And they're well into the tax, especially now after matching the offer sheet for DeAndre Ayton. Would Robert Sarver, who is notoriously frugal, would he value cutting $4, $5, $6 million of salary off his books in an uneven trade with a couple of those Mavs players, or maybe Nwaba and one of the Mavs players, or even Garrison Matthews and one of the Mavs players for Saric, which could save him probably, $15, $20 million. Do you get an asset in that? Do you get a second round pick from Phoenix for that? Even if it's just something like cash to cover a little more than the salary difference, because Phoenix will come out way ahead in that financially. Would you do that to consolidate contracts, come away with a potentially useful backup center in Saric, and have kind of, like you're saying, one of those nice salary filler contracts with him making a little over $9 million?
Yeah, exactly. That's where, to me, there's additional value beyond just potentially giving you another option for the backup center mix behind Alperen Şengün, which the Rockets see as a priority just based on how young he is. And I think people are overlooking way too much the fouling difficulties that he had against backups. Now you're asking him to play against starters, and some of the folks acting like it's going to be easy for him to play 30-plus minutes per night. That's a little aggressive. They do want depth, and a guy like Saric or Olynyk or Noel all can potentially help. But the other benefit is that, especially if you can combine into one larger salary, then it makes it all the easier to sort of roll over that trade filler to the deadline. And that gives you a bigger option than just David Nwaba, which is what you have now. Or I don't know, maybe there's some way that you can bring in that type of guy without giving up Nwaba, and then you have Nwaba and the filler, and you're just giving up those three players from Dallas, which you conceivably can do in the offseason because of the expanded rosters. Teams can have up to 20, so it's easier to do something like that. So yeah, there's multiple ways that you can go with that, but that's the other important angle, is that you do need some filler, but staying the course is not really an option because, of course, you have 20 players. The roster is completely full now. And even if you wanted to keep these guys on the roster as salary filler heading up to the 2023 trade deadline, it's not really realistic for you to have room for them on your final 15. Whereas if you can consolidate those three for one player, especially if it's one player that can sort of fill a need like backup center, then yeah, that's the way that you can sort of move it forward, that salary matching potential into the season. And so to me, that's important. It's like, certainly you would like to fill the role now, but you would also be giving yourself more flexibility at the deadline too, right?
No, absolutely. I think goal number one, well, aside from getting a legit core piece moving forward, I think goal number one with these Mavs contracts, it's a use them or lose them. A use them or lose them situation for them, where if you can consolidate them into a larger contract of a player that maybe cracks your rotation, that's goal number one. Goal number two is use them to extract an asset. Even if you just take on more salary and get a future second round pick, that's just one more pick for the coffers to use in future trades, or could be a player for you down the line.
Yeah.
And in even third tier or kind of the slightly more palatable alternative to just cutting these guys is just take on more salary and get some cash. I know the only person that's really going to, help is Tillman Fertitta, but, it could help the Rockets down the line if they take on a little extra salary. I'll throw a random trade out there. The Atlanta Hawks are slightly over the tax. If you traded Sterling Brown for Mo Harkless, I think that takes the Hawks out of the tax. The salary difference is like $1.5 million. Even worst case scenario for the Rockets, the Hawks give them something between $1.5 and $2 million. Well, that's a few extra $100,000 that goes in the Rockets' war chest there that they could maybe redeploy in a future trade, maybe not this year, next year, 2 years down the line, where their bottom line was a little bit better because of that trade, and it helps them down the line to make some other move where they have to take on money.
And the other element to all of this is that one way or another, that roster is going to get below 20 before training camp in all likelihood, whether you do a trade or if none of these materialize and you end up just releasing these guys, which I agree would feel like a missed opportunity. One way or another, I do think you're going to have some more openings. Now, a lot of these are going to be training camp deals, younger players you can evaluate perhaps for inclusion on the Vipers roster in the G League this year. But one thing that I think is important to note, you've seen a lot of headlines after they signed Bruno Fernando this week that their training camp roster is full. Technically, that's true, but I don't think it's going to stay that way. My guess is before camp, one way or another, you end up consolidating those at least 3 of the 4 Dallas players into 1 or 0. And then by extension of that, you have 2 or 3 other spots that you can give to younger players that you want to evaluate. That's another small benefit of doing it, right?
Right. And even, worst comes to worst, there's just no trades to be had. Nobody's interested in paying the asking price. They cut most of the Mavs guys. Again, another aside, I've said this numerous times on other podcasts. I very much hope they keep Boban. I think he's going to be amazing for that locker room. I really hope that he's the 15th guy on the roster. But when it comes to training camp, and teams do this all the time, that if there's no trades to be had, even if they bring the Mavs guys to training camp, if 2/3 of the way through training camp, it looks like there's no trades to be had, they can cut Burke and Chris and Brown and just start rotating guys in on Exhibit 10 deals for the Vipers, like you said.
Exactly.
This happens all the time, like more than halfway through training camp. There's a lot of guys that never even set foot on a training camp basketball court that are signed by NBA teams solely to be affiliate players for their G League franchise.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's going to be a big opportunity for the Rockets with those salary slots one way or another that are currently belonging to those Dallas guys. You're going to have resolution at some point in the next 4 to 6 weeks, I would say, as we get closer to training camp. Well, I guess 6 to 8 weeks, because theoretically, as you mentioned, it could go on once we actually get to camp. But more than likely, I think after the 24th, it'll get a little more clear what their options potentially are. And then, of course, we'll see some of the bigger situations around the league. I think it's pretty clear that a lot of trades, like even potentially Eric Gordon in Houston. We've heard, for example, the last month that the Lakers could have interest in EG, but they want to see what happens with the Kyrie Irving situation first. And the Nets don't want to deal Kyrie because, of course, he hasn't even asked out yet, unless that they know Kevin Durant is not going to be there. Because if they keep Kevin Durant, you're going to be a better team if you have Kyrie Irving than whatever you could get from him from the Lakers, because for a lot of reasons, expiring contract, all the off-court things that come with Kyrie, the baggage, you're not going to get the 4 quarters for the dollar, and Kyrie is not going to give the Nets as much value. So Brooklyn is sort of stalling to see if they can somehow patch things up with KD. My analogy for Brooklyn is that it's sort of like the Knicks and Carmelo Anthony in 2017, where I'm sure a lot of Rockets fans remember this analogy well. They thought they were getting Carmelo the whole offseason, ended up going to Oklahoma City. But the only leverage that really moved the Knicks to make the deal was the threat of training camp opening and the circus that would come from having a player who didn't really want to be there, and the circus that comes with that. Potentially that's what happens with Durant if the Nets try and stare him down. But right now they haven't gotten the offers they want, so the league is just sort of at a standstill because the smaller trades aren't happening because people want to see what happens with Kyrie. And then, the Kyrie goes all the way up the food chain. The Nets aren't going to move on that until there's clarity on KD. So I think it's possible that this could be an offseason where there's like a second wave of free agents and especially trades that happen late August, early September, especially mid to late September, where we get very close to training camp, just based on the fact that, to an extent, the KD situation has the market a little bit stalled. Is that fair?
No, absolutely. I think that the 2 moves that are holding everything up are the Durant trade, number 1, and number 2, what I'm guessing is an almost inevitable trade of Donovan Mitchell to the Knicks.
That too. Yeah.
I think those two. Well, of course, now that I've said that out loud, watch him get traded somewhere else. But those two moves, I think, will have ripple effects. Like you said, Durant. I mean, obviously, the Kyrie Irving situation is the biggest next ripple after Durant. But even with Mitchell, I think there'll be ripples. But everybody's waiting on those big fish to move before anything else happens.
Right, exactly. And of course, if you're a team that's potentially interested in Eric Gordon, who's a good player, the bottom line is you don't want to push your chips to the middle of the table now for EG, only to realize you might have had a shot at someone like Kyrie Irving or even Donovan Mitchell, for that matter, later in the offseason. So it is possible that other things could become possibilities later in the offseason. Who knows? If Brooklyn actually were to move KD and Kyrie, you had a really interesting point on your Twitter that because 2023, with the Rockets owning so many of their picks and the swap rights moving forward, since the Rockets in 2023 are almost certainly not going to be a playoff team, we don't know for a fact they're going to be one of the worst teams in the league, but they're certainly not going to be good. This could be an opportunity for the Nets, be it theirs or the Rockets, because there's the swap right. This is one of the only opportunities they have to actually feel pretty confident they're going to get a high pick in the 2023 draft, which also happens to be strong. So I thought it was a really interesting point that you raised. And of course, it would all happen late in the offseason because right now everything is built around this idea that they can somehow patch things up with KD and Kyrie. But if they can't, who knows? Maybe that's a situation. And of course, the same could happen in Utah if they end up selling off with Donovan Mitchell. But maybe, we talk about the marketplace for guys like Eric Gordon being stalled, but also if a team decides to all out sell, like hypothetically Brooklyn in the tweet that you put out at Beam a Thug today, then there may be other guys, role players up and down that roster that you could conceivably have an option to get, maybe by packaging those expiring Dallas salaries we talked about earlier, and you'd have to give some sort of other pick asset, of course, to sweeten the deal. It can't be just the expirings, but that's the sort of thing, the ripple effects. It's not just a matter of teams want to save their assets for guys like Eric Gordon. You also might have a situation where a team decides late in the offseason to totally tear it down, and then maybe there's opportunities, be it for the Rockets or some other team, to take advantage of that, right?
Yeah, that possibility, while I'm doubtful that Sean Marks will go that direction.
Yeah. But it makes sense.
As a Rockets fan, I'm very much hoping for it. And it's not a dumb strategy for Brooklyn. Again,
right.
that they would get a good lottery pick in the next draft, because even with the swap right, if they're tanking and the Rockets just, quite frankly, they're going to be one of the worst teams. I think they'll be a little better than they were last year, but it's likely Brooklyn's going to get a top pick this year if they tank. And, Durant can net them a ton of picks if they're not demanding a superstar player in return. Kyrie can get them picks, whether it's from the Lakers or otherwise. Seth Curry can get them something. They have a path to have a good future. And from a Rockets standpoint, that would be fantastic. Number one, that 23 swap right could be phenomenal in the sense that the Rockets are basically doubling up their chances at getting Victor Wembanyama in the lottery.
Yes.
That's number one with that swap right. And then owning the 24 pick outright, if the Nets go into a full rebuild,
it's hard to envision them in year two really taking a big jump.
Yeah, no, they would have to do an accelerated rebuild, but from the Rockets standpoint, to the extent they don't get involved in something like that, which they might try to leverage their future Brooklyn draft assets to get involved in something to extract some other future asset. But even if they stay uninvolved, the 23 swap and the 24 pick would just be really terrific assets for them.
The only other thing that could happen from a Rockets perspective, well, realistically, in the remainder of the 2022 offseason, of course, you can't rule out anything, but we're talking realistic possibilities here, would be a Kevin Porter Jr. contract extension. There's been some talk about that this week. Shams Charania of The Athletic reported that there was mutual interest between the Rockets and KPJ. Potentially, it might cut into your 2023 cap room a little bit, although not so much, because in all likelihood, because to keep his bird rights, to keep him restricted, you would have to keep his $9.7 million cap hold on the books. So in all likelihood, even in scenarios where they don't extend him, it's not like he'd be totally off your books no matter what. But the bottom line is you could potentially give him a deal that maybe eats a tiny bit into your cap room next summer, but the Rockets have shown that under certain circumstances, they're willing to do it. We saw them give Jayshawn Tate his contract a year early, although that was pretty creative with the salary actually dropping a little bit between this coming season and then the 2023 offseason for the next year, which is the really important one in the grand scheme with the salary figures. So if you squint hard enough, I know there's the off-court concerns. Everybody knows what happened on New Year's Day with the storming out at halftime, and we know KPJ's history in Cleveland, but of course he's shown a lot of flashes on the court. We know the shooting took a big jump this past season, and so if you squint hard enough, you can see clearly a very talented basketball player, and he put up massive numbers the last 7 games of the year, by the way, without Christian Wood. I believe he's putting up 27 points, 8 assists, 7 rebounds a game on pretty solid efficiency in the process. So, if you squint hard enough, you can make the case, even if, our buddy Dave Hardesty, ClutchFans might not feel as on board as a lot of Rockets Twitter about that. But I think you can at least make a case for extending KPJ. And I guess my question for you, A, what is his potential value? I would say some reason for encouragement is how limited that the market for Colin Sexton seems to be this summer with the Cavs, in the sense that I think A, there's a lot of guards, and B, he's restricted. And of course, that sort of downplays the market naturally because a lot of teams are reluctant to tie up these offer sheets when they feel that it's going to get matched anyway. So if Sexton is struggling to get a big offer, that has me optimistic that maybe the market for KPJ isn't going to be that great. And thus, because of that, maybe he's more willing to take a reasonable deal a year early. And then the other reason why I would at least be open to it, to me, it's all about where a KPJ extension would come in relative to that $9.7 million cap hold, what the delta is. Because I struggle to see a world, I know there's some risk, but I struggle to see a world where the Rockets would just want to cut bait entirely from KPJ after next season. Can he be the full-time point guard? That remains to be seen. But worst case, he's really developed as a shooter. The catch and shoot numbers this past season were fantastic from 3. We know the relationship with Jalen Green. One way or another, the cap hold is low enough at $9.7 million, and he's talented enough, just 22 years old, that I think they want to keep him around one way or another. It just depends on the figure. And to me, if you could get him at a starting salary with that extension that's not too dissimilar from the $9.7 million cap hold, I would be at least open to it. I would not give him a player option because I think that's extremely risky given some of his background. But if you could get 2-3 years, especially if you get a team option in there, but even if it's just 2-3 years, starting somewhere similar, maybe slightly up from the cap hold, I would at least be open to it. Where are you on the KPJ extension and specifically the numbers component of it?
So I agree with Dave Hardesty the vast majority of the time. Here, I'm probably a little more in favor of trying to find a palatable extension for KPJ than Dave is. And in fact, I may even zag a little from you, Ben, in that while I agree, number one, the biggest concern needs to be is any long-term deal for KPJ going to be one that involves that is team friendly, whether that's from a salary standpoint or a control standpoint on years, options, non-guarantees, things like that. I know others have thrown out the idea, well, would you be willing to give him a 4-year deal if you could get a 3rd year non-guaranteed and a 4th year team option? So a deal structure like that, I think, would be a lot more palatable and mitigate your risk if the maturity issues rear their ugly head again. From a salary standpoint, yes, $9.7 million cap hold because he was the last pick of the first round in his draft. He has a much lower cap hold than other first round picks that are coming up for new contracts. the Rockets, and I'm sure we'll touch on it in a little bit, but the Rockets are slated to have about $70 million in cap room in a year when 13 teams are going to have max cap room, and there just aren't that many great free agents. I'm not necessarily opposed to giving KPJ a starting salary that's a lot higher than that cap hold amount. If they could do something like a descending contract, this would be the year. If you don't have a free agent that you love, that you want to get, maybe you're not hot to trot for LeBron James or James Harden, although I think he'll probably end up in Philly. But maybe this is the year to use some of that money on KPJ, front load his deal, have it descend with team control, non-guaranteed, and team option.
Yeah, because
it's the structure that I care more about than the starting salary.
By the way, just to clarify, the $70 million figure, is that if you renounce KPJ? Is that with the cap hold or without?
That is with the cap hold.
Oh, shoot. I didn't realize that. For some reason, I was thinking, wow. So conceivably, you could drop the cap hold and get even more than that.
Correct. So the way to get to 70 million, excuse me, is you waive Eric Gordon, you waive David Nwaba, and then probably waive Garrison Matthews and Dacian Nix. And then, at least in my projections, I have them at picking around 4 with their own pick, and then in the mid-20s with the Milwaukee pick. So you have to account for those cap holds. And if you do that, you're going to get to a little over 70 million in cap room with KPJ's cap hold.
With the cap hold. Wow. Okay. That's interesting. That makes the case even stronger, in my opinion, to look at a potential extension this summer. And especially and you've been a proponent in the past of the idea that you don't have to just go out and spend all that money on the best free agents available in 2023, because first off, some of them, like LeBron James, are probably not going to be realistic anyway for a number of reasons. And even the ones that might not be the best investment. You might be better off trying to, say, trade for a Duncan Robinson if you can get an asset with that, or you get a pretty good player who's a little overpaid, and then you sort of roll your space over and you just keep your flexibility moving forward. And of course, these days we know that many times it's by trade rather than free agency is when the true impact players actually move teams. So in that vein, if you're looking at this cap space not as a means to just drop $70 million in free agency, but just sort of as opening up possibilities for you, then maybe that makes sense for a KPJ, like a bloated year one, and then have it descending to where you have more flexibility in 2024 and 2025, right?
Exactly. And in fact, it's a sobering reality, honestly, that, we all had these grand designs of, well, the summer of 2023, that's when it's all going to happen.
Well, it's the pivot point, but
right. It's certainly a pivot point, but I think the odds of them going out and getting 2 max free agents, they're going to join, and all of a sudden we're going to go from, a top 5 pick to a championship contender. It's not quite that high.
Yeah. The only one that I could see that I'm just keeping a little bit of an eye on is the James Harden situation, because I know the relationship between Harden and the Rockets is pretty positive, and there are certain scenarios, just like we've seen from Chris Paul the last few years, where especially these high IQ guards can sort of have a career renaissance in their low to mid 30s. But in this particular situation, the reason why, even though selfishly I think it would be fun, realistically, I don't see it happening, because in my opinion, there's 2 ways that things go for James Harden. Either he gets his body right. We know he's had the hamstring issues the last 2 years. And if he gets his body right and he returns to form, then it's hard to envision Philadelphia with Harden and Joel Embiid not being really, really good. And if that's the case, why would he leave? Whereas the flip side, maybe the version we saw last year is who he is, and him not being able to take care of his body like the way some of his peers do leads to him aging a bit quicker than a lot of other superstar guards. And in that case, maybe Philly isn't that good. But if that's the case, why would the Rockets want him? So to me, it's just one of those things where the Harden possibility, you can't rule it out. But to me, it just seems very unlikely. The only way I could see Harden being realistic is if he bounces back to a level in which you do feel pretty good that he's going to be a good player into his mid-30s, yet somehow for some other reason Philadelphia still wildly underperforms and he wants out. And I just have a hard time seeing that. To me, if Harden is anything close to what you would want to give him a max salary next summer, then that inherently means that Philly is going to be really, really good. And then why would he leave?
Exactly. I'm of the exact same mindset. Now, I do know some James Harden truthers that have believed since the moment we traded him, he was coming back either this summer or next summer. The hope is kept alive for those folks, but I'm
the player
with you,
option.
Ben.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I just can't see how it makes sense. I just think there's two ways that it goes, and either way, it doesn't make sense for the Rockets. Or one way it doesn't make sense for the Rockets, and the other way it doesn't make sense for James. So never say never, but unlikely. So with that in mind, we covered 2023, a lot of the options there, which may not be as sexy as a lot of fans want to hear. But at the same time, it's the beginning. Again, I think the pivot point is the thing to emphasize. It's the window in which you start aggressively looking at those moves, and whether they come next summer or if it's at the 2024 trade deadline or the 2024 offseason, the bottom line is your window is wide open, and hopefully that coincides with when your current crop of young players led by Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., Kevin Porter Jr. are really starting to hit their primes. As we close out this podcast, this episode of The Logger Line with David Weiner, Rockets capologist, you know him best as Beam Thug on Twitter and on ClutchFans. Want to go rapid fire with some other 2022 considerations as we get closer to training camp in late September and the season opening in October. We do think the schedule is going to be coming out in early August, so that's something to look forward to. As far as training camp, to me, the battle to watch, at least with the starters, is at the small forward position. Eric Gordon was a starter all of last season when he played. There's been reports from Kelly Iko of The Athletic this offseason that if Gordon is on the roster, Kelly expects EG to start. On the other hand, I thought there was a very interesting interview that Steven Silas gave Adam Spolane of Sports Radio 610 at Summer League, in which he went out of his way to talk about the value of having Jayshawn Tate and Alperen Sengun on the floor at the same time, because then you can't put the 5 on Tate, which is something that's really clogged the Rockets offense the last couple of years. There have been some reports that Jayshawn Tate has really improved his three-point shooting and his form this summer, but again, we'll wait and see on that. It's easy to say that in the summer. In terms of whether that translates, that's another matter. But I thought the Silas comments on Tate were very, very interesting to me, because you did give him the new contract. We'll see if Eric Gordon is even here. And with 4 of the 5 starters left, they're starting, assuming health, Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, and then Jabari Smith Jr. and Alperen Sengun in the front court. There's only one spot left. I know Eric Gordon has all the pedigree, but I don't know. I thought that Steven Silas interview was pretty interesting. And the more I think about it, there's a pretty big incentive if you can not hide the 5 on Jayshawn Tate, the way we saw happen so much last year when, of course, you started him next to Christian Wood, who didn't have nearly the bulk that Sengun does. So at the moment, even though I think he's a slight underdog, I'm leaning Jayshawn Tate for that 5th spot. Where are you?
I'm firmly in the Eric Gordon camp for multiple reasons.
Make your case.
Number one, three-point shooting. Until we see Jayshawn Tate hitting in a mid to high 30% clip, I think he hurts you from a spacing standpoint. I love Jayshawn Tate. He might be my favorite Rocket, but he is a poor three-point shooter through 2 years of his career. Gordon obviously was one of the best three-point shooters in the league last season. I think he really helped space the floor, especially when you have kind of that super three-point range that he does, where he can set up 5-6 feet behind the three-point line. And even if he doesn't shoot it, that stretches the defense a little bit. Plus, I think he has the defensive chops to guard bigger players, where you're not going to get killed not having kind of a beefier player in Tate in the starting lineup. I think you can survive in a 3-guard lineup with Eric Gordon. I think you also have to think about the Eric Gordon trade value
Okay,
situation,
fair.
and that you want to, I don't want to say showcase, but you want to put him in situations where opposing GMs get a real look at Eric Gordon starting NBA player. And then lastly, and I know he won sixth man of the year, he's been a good soldier, but every report I've heard is that throughout his Rockets tenure, Eric Gordon has very, very, very much wanted to be a starter and has made that known to coaches. So I think you don't want an unhappy Eric Gordon on this team when he's the veteran leader that you're
Yeah.
looking to. So for all those reasons, I think Eric Gordon is the starting three, or your third guard in your three guard lineup
Mhm.
starting game one if he is not traded.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The one pushback that I would have as far as the floor spacing, I think that's potentially a bit less important now that you have Jabari Smith instead of Paolo Banchero. We can go back and forth about Jabari versus Paolo all night, and we've done that in recent pods, so we don't need to here. But the one benefit to Jabari is that, at least based on his college numbers, I know it didn't show at Summer League, but that's a tiny sample. He should be a really, really good shooter. So whereas I think it would have been just nasty, the spacing, if you had Tate, Banchero, and Şengün on the front line, based on what Şengün showed you from 3 a year ago, which he really tailed off as the year went along, you might have okay floor spacing this year because you have Jabari. That's before we even go into whether the Tate three-point shooting improvement is legitimate, because in general, I'm with you. That's one of those things you take as a bonus. You don't count on that going in. But there's also ways that,
Although I will push back a little bit there, Ben, that you've lost Christian Wood, who for all his flaws was a very good 3-point shooting big man.
that's true. I
So,
mean,
so you're swapping him out for
for
Jabari. You
Jabari,
have a
yeah.
fourth 3-point shooter in Şengün. So you still have you got Jabari instead of Wood as your shooting big, but then you still have a non 3-point shooter in Şengün versus Tate. So
Yeah.
not much has changed.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Comparing Jabari to Christian in terms of floor spacing, I still wish we would have gotten to see, by the way, more minutes with the Christian and Şengün front court for that reason. I think that was sort of a missed opportunity. But at the end of the day, what limited we saw, I agree, it wasn't super encouraging. That's something I hadn't considered because, yeah, while Jabari is better relative to Banchero in that area, in terms of the floor spacing, yeah, it's fairly comparable to Christian Wood in all likelihood. So while it wouldn't be the Wood Tice levels of awful floor spacing, at the same time, yeah, it's fair to have concerns. I think that's a fair point. Of course, who knows if Eric's going to be here, but this hypothetical is on the assumption that he is. And you're right. More than anything, at this point in Eric Gordon's career, if he's going to be around, and to this point, he's been a really good soldier from the perspective of the leadership impact, not making a fuss about wanting to go to a contender, then yeah, you should probably do right by him. So if that's a factor, then yeah, that could tilt me in that direction. The other thing is that you may have to be creative with your rotations anyway, simply from the perspective I mentioned earlier of not having the 5 on Jae'Sean Tate, or maybe there's ways that you pull guys earlier in the first and third quarters than you did this past year, because I think Stephen Silas is going to have a pretty tricky conundrum as it currently stands with finding minutes for all of these guys. And the big one to me is Tari Eason, who's 21 years old, looked great at Summer League. At 21, he's older than a lot of the other prospects the Rockets have brought in the last couple of years. He's more physically ready. Yet you look at the forward spots. We've talked about Jae'Sean Tate and Eric Gordon. Obviously, Jabari Smith. KJ Martin is still on the roster, even if he doesn't want to be, and he's been an accomplished player the last couple of seasons. What do you think the Rockets can do to find minutes for Easton? What are the ways that you can do that? Because to me, he clearly deserves to play from day one. He's probably more ready than a lot of the prospects you have played from day one the last couple of years. It's just not clear to me with the roster, how it's currently set, how exactly he's going to get those.
Right. I mean, I do not envy Stephen Silas in that, we have an improved roster from last season, I believe. But yeah, there's a lot of young guys that probably need minutes, and there's not enough minutes to be had if you want to fully develop your core guys. Um, I couldn't tell you for sure what I think the rotation is going to be, especially since we're kind of weak at the backup center spot, and at least for this season, potentially a little weak at the backup point guard spot. Although I'm encouraged by the guys we have and that are going to develop. Gun to my head, if you're asking me like what's the rotation going to look like, my guess is, we just talked about, I think Eric Gordon's going to probably be the fifth starter. Assuming that's the case, I think Tate for sure is your sixth man if he's not starting. After that, I think maybe Josh Christopher is probably your seventh guy. And then, like you said, you got to get minutes for Tari Eason. I think he's your eighth man. And then after that, you're looking at whoever wins the backup point guard spot between Daishen Nix and Ty Washington. You're looking at them as a back end of rotation player. Perhaps Garuba finally is healthy enough to show the coaching staff something in training camp. Maybe he wins the backup center spot, but even if he does, I don't think he's going to play major minutes.
Yeah,
or KJ Martin, like you said.
Yeah,
KJ Martin. They may use KJ Martin as the eighth or ninth man and just go small.
Yeah, so, I would say on paper you have the backup point guard at 9, and then placeholder backup center, whether it be Garuba, Boban, or one of these guys they bring in. We talked about some of the possibilities earlier. Those would be sort of 10, and then you would have KJ Martin just waiting in the wings to see what the possibilities are. And of course, I think KJ Martin sees the writing on the wall with that, and that's why, according to some reports, he may be looking for a deal. We'll see if one materializes. The Rockets, if they're not going to be able to play KJ, it probably does make sense to get value that they could roll forward, as opposed to KJ, whose value would probably decline if he's just sitting on the bench and not really playing a whole heck of a lot. One other thing real quick on Stephen Silas. This coming season, it's interesting because he's in year 3 of a 4-year contract. The 4th year, according to reports, is not even fully guaranteed. He's got to show something that makes you think that he's the guy to give him that next contract. Yet this roster is still insanely young. Best case, you're probably talking about moving from 20 wins to somewhere in the 25 to 30 range, barring a major transaction. What can Stephen Silas do to make you, if you're the Rockets, if you're Rafael Stone, if you're Tillman Fertitta, what can Stephen do? What should he do to convince you that hey, he's the right guy?
Well, I mean, I think he's even gone on the record as saying that he kept things purposely very simple last season and plans to install a more, I guess, additional layers to his offense. And then also bringing in Lionel Hollins to head up the defense, two major coaching moves that I think will hopefully help the Rockets next season. I am not going to judge Stephen Silas by wins and losses, but if we're being brutally honest here, the Rockets were pretty god awful last season, and they were supposed to be bad. Like they but I think the splits, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but when Eric Gordon played, this was a competent NBA team, albeit clearly developmental. And when Eric Gordon didn't play, this was a garbage team. I mean, it was terrible. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the young guys didn't know what to do. And, some of that kind of falls on the coaching. And if Silas is saying that, look, he purposely did not install enough layers of the offense for this team to look that competent, because he had so many 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds on the roster, we'll see. Eason's 21, like you said, but you're adding another 19-year-old in Jabari. Are they going to trust Jalen Green and KPJ and Jabari to run a more sophisticated offense? I think their ability to pick up a more sophisticated Silas offense is going to say a lot about Silas's future in Houston. If I can see development from the players, and there are wrinkles to the offense that show that, Silas, you can see Silas has added this. Here's something they couldn't do last year they can do this year. That will make me feel better about Silas. But if they flounder again, then I think Tillman Fertitta and Rafael Stone would be right to question whether Silas is the guy long term.
Yeah, and certainly defense is going to be a huge part of the equation too, because last year we know how dreadful they were. This year it was the focus of the draft. I know that young players typically aren't that strong defensively out of the gate, but you've added a ton more just length, power, versatility, switchability, and again, it's just something that if they're going to talk all offseason, which they have, about wanting to improve that side of the ball, then you should see at least some improvement. So even if it's not in wins and losses, just some of the metrics, some of the little things under the hood, you do want to see growth on both sides of the ball, and that's probably the most fair way to judge him. David, last question before we get you out. I know in your ClutchFans salary cap update going into the offseason, you mentioned the Rockets not really having any rights to retain Bruno Fernando, but they ended up doing it anyway, because giving him a training camp deal, because basically he didn't have any other options, and the Rockets for now giving him the final spot on their 20-man going into training camp. But you mentioned in your salary cap update that you thought he played pretty well. What's your level of excitement for bringing him back and putting him into the mix behind Alperen Şengün with, we mentioned Garuba, we mentioned Boban, we threw out some hypothetical veteran additions earlier, Saric, Noel, Olenek, those guys. What do you think Fernando potentially can do once Bruno gets his opportunity in training camp?
I think the deal they got him on was just about what I would have hoped they would do. I thought there was a small chance they would have extended him a qualifying offer because he did show flashes late last season. But all in all, they just didn't have a roster spot for him on the 15-man, which is why I think them extending him an Exhibit 10 deal was a smart move, because if he doesn't make the 15-man roster, you can convert him to a two-way contract. And as a two-way player, I think Bruno Fernando is a great option. We'll see what Trevor Hudgens can do in training camp, but the fact that the Rockets still have, by virtue of being having the worst regular season record last season, they have top waiver wire priority. And last season they waited till the very end of training camp, sifted the waiver wire, and found who is the best guy on a two-way contract who didn't make his team, and that was Garrison Matthews last season, which was a great pickup. And I do think the Rockets are going to leave that same door open this season, and that might affect Bruno's chances of making the team. So we'll see about that. But on an Exhibit 10 deal, I think he's got a shot to make the 15-man roster, although I wouldn't hold my breath. But even on a two-way contract, he can give you some minutes as a kind of a beefy backup five. He's only 6'9", but he's got sand in his pants, as Bill Worrell would like to say. So I think he gives the Rockets just another option if Garuba shows that he's not up to the task and they want to kind of go big. Mm-hmm. So I like the fact that the Rockets added that extra look there without having to commit a guaranteed standard NBA contract.
Makes sense. And I should correct myself. The Rockets did have bird rights on him if they wanted to give him that qualifying offer, but as you mentioned, they chose not to. So that's why
even if they didn't make him a qualifying offer, he would have been an unrestricted free agent, but they still would have had bird rights.
Okay, let's try to get the qualifying.
But even then, they chose not to use bird rights and instead,
Exhibit 10, because he just didn't have the market.
For Bruno, he did not have other offers out there.
Right. Which is fair because he's played 3 years and hasn't really broken out. But he did show some flashes late last season, and there's very little harm in bringing him back on an Exhibit 10 and seeing if any of that translates.
Absolutely.
Folks, that's a good place to wrap it. Bruno Fernando fan club. I think the membership is fairly low, but he plays with such energy, such spark, that let's at least leave the door open to that. He should at least be a fun preseason guy, because he's a guy, at least on paper, like that kind of motor. I could see him putting up like 10 and 10 in 15 minutes in a preseason game, right?
Oh, absolutely. We just got to make sure Carol Dawson isn't running the front office and gives him a $42 million contract.
Yeah. Folks, that's where we'll wrap it today. He is David Weiner. Follow him on Twitter @BeamAthDog. That's also his handle on ClutchFans, where you can read his work. Publishes a lot of cap updates throughout the year, including his most recent one just before the draft in June. Most of that still applies because the Rockets roster really hasn't dramatically changed this offseason, other than, of course, bringing in those 3 first-round picks that we've been talking about really for the entire last month plus. With that, we will wrap things for today. For David, I'm Ben. You can follow me on Twitter at Ben Dubose. I write for the Rockets Wire. That's where I'm editor, USA Today's blog covering your Houston Rockets. You can follow them on Twitter at the Rockets Wire and the website rocketswire.usatoday.com. This podcast, please subscribe if you've not already. The Logger Line, brought to you by Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. It's available at Apple, Google, Spotify, anywhere you listen to your podcast. Just search for the Logger Line and subscribe, leave us a positive review, and we'll keep this going throughout the offseason. And who knows, perhaps we keep this going into the season as well, because I'm having a lot of fun doing it, getting some great guests. So we may as well stick with this and see where we go from here. Should be a very fun Rockets team. Again, for David, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.